Well, hello, my name is David Wright. I'm from Ely, Nebraska. I'm a fourth-generation rancher. My son currently lives on the ranch, and I also own a local newspaper at home. We own 4 newspapers and print 10. But what I'd like to say is that what we really do is we raise children to become responsible people of society. Honest, responsible people with integrity. We just have cows and a newspaper to help us do that. So Tim's got an interesting deal here, compulsion. I never thought about going to Thomas Jefferson. I'll go to a more local, a more modern one, well maybe not necessarily for the younger people, but there was a guy who wrote a song that said, I lift 16 ton, and what do I get? Another day older and deeper in debt.
Yep.
St. Peter, don't call me because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Now that was about the coal miners, but the company store concept worked also after the Civil War, when slaves were released and they became sharecroppers. So the company store idea has not gone away, and it's still here, and it's very strong. So what I'd like to show you is just, which way, Aaron?
Left and right.
Left and right, okay. Just a quick history of the beef checkoff. I got this from Bob Taylor. I could never figure out how we got started with the checkoff, and Bob Taylor pointed me to the Farmers' Revolt, which took place at the turn of the 20th century. At that time, commodity prices were low, inflation was high, the farmers were not very happy, and they started really, they formed the Populist Committee. They had William Jennings Bryan they put forth as a presidential candidate. But some of these things are what came out of that Farmers' Revolt. We have the Sherman Antitrust Act, and we have the Clayton Act of 1914. Then in 1919, we had the consent decree, which the packers agreed amongst themselves. They could feel the heat coming on from Congress, so they thought they'd get out in front of that. And they formulated their own consent decree, to which the packers had to sell their interest in the stockyards, warehouses, and wholesale retail meat. And they were hoping that that would hold Congress off and then just appease them. But yet in 1921, Congress came forward with the Packers and Stockyard Act, which prohibited packers from engaging in unfair and deceptive practices, giving undue preference to persons or localities. Stockyards were forbidden from dealing with livestock that they handled, and this only affected stockyards with pens larger than 20,000 feet. Now here's what happens next. 1922 was the first beef checkoff, and it was 5 cents a carload. There was 25 head on a carload. Of course, we're talking about train carloads. The packers matched the 5 cents, and the assessment was collected at the markets, and it was a refundable checkoff. The first year, that checkoff created $70,000 in 1922. Thomas Wilson, now if you know who Wilson Pack was, he was one of the big packers at the time, and quite a leader in the packing industry. He came up with the idea to form the Livestock and Meats Board to administer this newfound money, this checkoff funds. And the funds were collected on all species, beef, pork, and lamb. In 1931, there was an increase to 2 cents a carload. And then in 53, there was another increase to 2 cents per head. And then in 1955, the National Beef Council was formed. And what that was it was Texas Farm Bureau. They led the way to form the National Beef Council. And how they did it was they got 17 states to form beef councils. And it was a voluntary checkoff. So it was supported by the 17 states that created beef councils and by producers. And the National Livestock and Meats Board was still going on also, was still a refundable checkoff. In 1962, the rate increased to 3 cents per head. In 1963, the National Beef Council goes broke. And I was told that the reason it went broke was because they could not meet their obligations to advertising contracts that they had. So those 17 beef councils that helped form the National Beef Council, they joined the National Livestock and Meats Board to form the Beef Industry Council. And at that time, they broke the species up into groups within the National Livestock and Meats Board. there was some growling going on that because all the dollars were thrown together that maybe my species wasn't getting represented as well as another one was. So they formed the Beef Industry Council, the Pork Industry Group, and the Lamb Committee. Between 1963 and 1975, there were 7 checkoff bills that failed in Congress. They were all opposed by the National Livestock and Meats Board, of course, because they already had a refundable checkoff in place. And they were also opposed by Farm Bureau. And I was told the reasoning there that Farm Bureau was opposed was because they were still angry about the National Beef Council going broke. So they weren't interested in passing any law for another checkoff. In 1976, Congress finally passed the checkoff law, the Beef Information Promotion Act of 1976. And it was a convoluted law, it had all kinds of problems with it, but they passed it, and it had to have a referendum, which took place in 1977. And the criteria for there was 1 million potential voters, so it's just beef producers. 231,000 voted. That's all that voted out of 1 million. 130,000 voted yes. They had to have a 2/3 majority for it to pass. They only got 56, so the referendum failed, and it was taken at the county extension offices. They came back in 1980 with another referendum on the same 1976 law. This time they changed the parameters a little bit. Instead of it being a 2/3, they made it a simple majority, and it still had to take place at the county extension office. And as you can see, again, there's 1 million potential voters, and only 230,000 voted. 79,000 voted in favor. They needed 50%, so they only had 36%, so it failed again. So in 1985, they rewrote the 1976 law, and they pushed it through the Farm Bill, and it changed some of the criteria of the checkoff, and that's what we had the 1988 referendum. In 1988, they changed the parameters. It was no longer 2/3, it's still a simple majority, but now instead of being an extension office, it's at the ASCS office. And again, there's 1 million potential voters, 256,000 voted, 202,000 voted yes, so they got the 50, it was more than 50% they needed, 78.9%, and it passed. It was taken at the ASCS office. And I find this one really interesting. I'm sure some of you have heard of the 80-20 rule, and I've read books on it, and this is just quite interesting. 20% of the producers passed that law. 20%. So in 1988, we have a referendum, and before NCBA was formed in 1986, before the merger, before NCBA merged with the Beef Industry Council, the Beef Industry Council was the #1 contractor for those checkoff dollars. The 1985 checkoff that passed the 88 referendum. They are collecting $80 million. Half of that money is staying in the states, the other half's going to the Cattlemen's Beef Board. Of that half that goes to the Cattlemen's Beef Board, the Beef Industry Council is the #1 contractor. They're getting most of the money. The Livestock and Meats Board is the #2 contractor, and the National Cattlemen's Association is the #3 contractor, and they're only getting $5 million. Today, NCBA is getting $37 to $40 million in those contracts. In 1992, talks began to form this merger. What had happened was the Pork Industry Group and the Land Committee separated from the National Livestock and Meats Board, which left only the Beef Industry Council at the Livestock and Meats Board. What a prime opportunity to grab a hold of that contractor. So, National Cattlemen started negotiations with the National Livestock and Meats Board to form NCBA. You can find this was a hearing that I stumbled across at Christmas probably 3 or 4 years ago. But in 1994, on August 5th, there's a Senate hearing that Senator Feingold from Minnesota is all over Bob Drake from Oklahoma, who is the president of NC, saying that if we have this merger, that all of these things are going to happen that are going to be a detriment to the producers. Well, Mr. Drake would say, I don't know, and then you got to read through the whole thing, you get to the end, and you find written answers that they send back. And this I find interesting. Between 85 and 97, now that's before there's a national checkoff, NC, National Cattlemen, has 45 employees. After the checkoff, when they start winning some contract dollars to the tune of $5 million, they all of a sudden got 80 employees. What did that checkoff help fund? The growth of NC. In 1993, 44% of NC's budget was checkoff dollars at $5 million, and 56% of their of the budget was non-checkoff, $6.9 million. That came from memberships and their conventions and wherever else they could raise some money. In 1995, this is just before the merger, the summer of 95, the Cattlemen's Beef Board, which is the board I serve on today, had 8 amendments to their bylaws. Those bylaw amendments changed our committee so that we had to have joint committee meetings now. And those joint committee meetings were with an industry organization. And we had to have our annual and summer meeting with a nonprofit industry organization. That was in July. In January, a mere 6 months later, NCBA is formed. The National Livestock and Meats Boards merged with the National Cattlemen and the Beef Industry Council. The Beef Industry Council becomes the Federation of State Beef Councils, and now we have NCBA. Guess who now all of a sudden is the #1 largest nonprofit industry organization who gets to step right into the CBB and participate in all those meetings and where that money's decided to go? NCBA. This was a planned, orchestrated event. The Federation consists of 45 state beef councils. There are 5 states that are too small to support a beef council. On those 45 state beef councils, 660 directors serve on those beef councils. Of those 660, 85 of them become Federation directors because it's a pay-to-play game. As you can see, this is in Nebraska. Our first 3 seats, 1 through 3, cost $34,000 apiece. Seats 4 and 5 are 2.5% of our budget, and our budget is $10 million. So those seats cost $250,000 apiece. 6 and up are 5% of our budget, and seats 6 and up cost $500,000 apiece. Can you see why there's only 85 directors out of 660? It's all about the money. The Federation collects about $10 million a year from these seats. In 2010, Secretary Vilsack had written a letter saying, because NCBA was trying to change the governance of the organization so they get more control over the beef councils, and Secretary Vilsack had written a letter to him saying, you can't do that. So while we were having this meeting, and we're all in this room, there's 85 members on it, I asked the question, how many in this room are not or are dues-paying NCBA members? Well, they all raised their hands. So I rephrased the question. I said, let me ask it this way. How many are not NCBA dues-paying members? There was 3 of us. Dues-paying members of the organization that wins all the contracts. No, there's no conflict of interest here. Nah. You're looking at it all wrong, Mr. Wright. In 2008, NCBA now has 126 employees. 70% of their budget, $37 million, is from the checkoff. 30% is non-checkoff. Forrest Roberts earns $450,000 a year, and 70% of his pay is from the beef checkoff. What has the beef checkoff done? It's made NCBA a very powerful organization. This is an investment schedule from the state beef councils, and it'll show you how much each one of them pays to buy those seats. And down over in the corner, you can see that they get $10,900,000 from those state beef councils buying these investment seats. Now this is how they spend money. And you'll see the column that says BPOC, that's Beef Board Operating Committee. That's the 50 cents that goes to the national checkoff to the Cattlemen's Beef Board. Those are contracts that NCBA won. $34 million worth. Then in the middle you'll see the Federation of State Beef Councils. Notice that number? That's that 10.9 that came from the other page. And then there's how they spend the money. So we've got program costs, and then we go down and we have total program cost, and that gives the impression that these 34 million that they collected from on contracts, and then the 10 million they got from the beef councils, that they're kind of merging them so it looks like we're doing a good job spending the checkoff dollars. But look at implementation costs about in the middle. What an implementation cost is, a program cost is, this little clicker will say it's 10 bucks. They have cost recovery, which means I cannot charge the beef checkoff any more than 10 bucks for this. But I can charge them an implementation cost, what it costs me to get the clicker. That's the simplest way I can put it. So here's our implementation cost. The implementation cost from the beef board was $7 million. The implementation cost from the Federation is, what's that say, 1.0? 1.1? That means they paid themselves. Because the money came from the state beef councils to go to the Federation, and the Federation put some of that money in the contract, but I paid myself to do the job. So then as you go down further, you'll notice that the column, when we get down here to the non-strategic expenses, you notice that all of a sudden there's no more CDB money being spent on it, no contract money. Now it's just Federation money. Again, we have implementation cost again for $1.9 million. You know, I said this to Secretary Vilsack, and I'll say it to you, and I've said it to a lot of people before. Al Capone would be proud of this. You just moved money from the taxpayer's pocket into my pocket, and look at that nice system that I just did it in. So, to add more anger to the producers who are interested, this is a contract. This is an authorized request. This is what we call them ARs. And you see this is from the North American Meat Association, which is obviously not NCBA. It's somebody who's trying to contract for some dollars, and they're trying to contract to do promotion, and for $631,000. The direct cost is $500,000. The implementation cost is $120,000. Do you see where it says Federation and state beef councils? How much funding they stuck into that? Big fat zero, isn't there? Now here's an NCBA one for implementation. Or I went too far. Here's an NCBA one for retail marketing, and it's for promotion. They have the total cost, the direct cost. Notice how the implementation is blank. But then look who else stuck money into that contract. The Federation did. You see, Federation dollars cannot be spent on other contractors. It can only be spent on NCBA. So we took all the money from the producers through the state beef councils, but we can only spend it on stuff that we want to do. We can't spend it on if some other contractor comes and tries to bid on a contract. Only we get it. I'm we referring to NCBA. But notice how the implementation cost is blank. Because this is what NCBA is allowed to do. If I back up. So this outfit here had to bid, and they have to put their implementation costs along with the direct costs for a total cost. So that means they're bidding $600,000. If NCBA was doing this, they don't have to put implementation costs in. Just direct costs. So who's got the better budget? Who's got the better contract? The one who doesn't have the implementation costs. Because NCBA is then allowed to come back with a separate implementation cost, where other contractors are not. So here they took all the research the NCBA does, they tied into one implementation contract for $2.4 million, and look at there, the Federation's kicking money into it. And here's where it really gets fun. This is, if you notice down the bottom here, it says total budget and total actual expenses. In 2011, on this research implementation, it's not direct costs, it's just implementation. 2011, they budgeted 2.2 million, but the actual expenses was 1.9. In 2010, it's 2.2. The actual was 2. And 2009, it was 2 million, and it was 1.72. The actuals. So that means it was budgeted higher than what was actually spent. Here is industry information. See, it's an implementation AR. There's 4 implementation ARs. $2 million, again, Federation sticking money in. Again, look at the historical. The budget is higher than what it actually costs. Same with promotion, it's $4 million. The Federation put money in. Same thing again. The actual, or the budgeted, is higher than the actual. And the last one is consumer information, and the same scenario again. So here, I put together this little chart. The top number is the budgeted number. The bottom number is the actual cost. So over in 2009, when you total those all up, we get down here to the total. The total of those implementation ARs was $10 million budgeted, but they only spent 8.8. That left a surplus of 1.2. And then in 2010, a surplus of 1.8. In 2011, a surplus of 1.2. Now, you need to understand, NCBA does not get to keep that surplus. It goes back into the kitty. But what you also need to understand is when they make these decisions, who gets these contracts, it's done in 2 days at the operating committee meeting. So all the contractors come, they all bid, the money's all split up in 2 days. NCBA overbid it, the implementation cost, which took the money off the table, which means Mike Calcrate, if he's contracting, doesn't have access to that money. He doesn't get a shot at it. So then this is what they do later on in here. This is an email that I received. It says, the operating committee has approved the NCBA request to move fundings between authorized requests, resulting in offsetting adjustments for NCBA approved implementation ARs. So they had too much money in 2, they shifted it over to 2 other ones. Nobody else gets to do that. These are the total check. Fred Stokes asked me to find out if I could figure out what the total checkoff dollars have been collected. Since 1988, this column here is the 50 cents that the Beef Council sent to CBB. The next column is the 5 states that don't have beef councils. They send their money directly to CBB. The last one is the importers, or the next one is the importers. They send all imported funds go to CBB. And that would be the total that CBB collected. So over those years, from 88 to 13, CBB has collected $1.1 billion. But remember, the state beef councils collected 50 cents, the first column. So you have to add the first column into that again to tell you what the total collections were for the beef checkoffs since 1988, and it comes up to $2.1 billion since 1988. So, are we going the wrong direction? In 1985, when they passed the law, there were 1 million beef producers, 34 million headed beef cows in the country. Today, there's only 729,000 beef producers and only 29 million head of beef cattle. Even NC cannot see they're going the wrong direction. Their membership in 1994 was 40,000, today it's 26,000. But hell, I don't need those members when I get all that money, do I? This is the opening paragraph of the 1985 Beef Promotion Research Act. This is the first paragraph in the act. It says, to enable cattle producers to establish, finance, and carry out a coordinated program of research, producer and consumer information, and promotion to improve, maintain, and develop what? Markets for cattle, comma, markets for beef, comma, markets for beef products. Remember the guy who started this in 1922? How many cattle do you think he sold? Thomas Wilson didn't sell cattle, he sold beef and beef products. I've been doing this for 12 years. I spent 8 years on the Nebraska Beef Council, and I'm on my 4th year on the Cattlemen's Beef Board. I have never seen an authorized request to develop markets for cattle. Now, my daughter thinks I'm too intense, so she said I should finish with this. You lift 16 ton, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't call me because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company still. Thank you.